Hi and welcome back to the channel. Yes, I'm still doing the January thing where I'm only watching movies that I haven't seen before. And to be honest with you, we're almost halfway through the month. Yep, it's the 11th, so let's say a third the way through the month. And it's quite hard. It's not as easy as you think it is when you've seen as many movies as I have. And so I've kind of diversified a bit. I know what I'm going to watch for the rest of the month. I know what I'm going to talk about on the channel for the rest of the month. But it is a little bit hard because there are movies I wanted to watch and I simply can't. I've made a list to watch them in February. But January is kind of the way February is for alcoholics when they do dry February. Being a movieaholic is weird, and to add to the pain, I got a bunch of movies in the mail that I really want to watch, but I can't watch them until February. And the struggle is real. But having said that, I've got two documentaries, a superhero pair of movies you might not have seen yet, and an adaptation of a Robert A. Heinlein novel, which is kind of different and which fixes all of the problems with the original novel. So let's get started. It's quite easy to be dismissive of a documentary that was created by a YouTuber, but this one got me because I watched the guy's channel, and it's an extraordinary little personal documentary which you can watch for free. It only runs about an hour, 5 minutes of which is the Patreon supporters scrolling up the screen. I recommend it. It's a movie called Natsuki the Movie by Chris Broad, whose channel Abroad in Japan talks about him living as an Englishman in Japan. And he has a friend who lives in regional Japan and who runs a beauty salon, and that guy's name is Natsuki. And Natsuki is very atypical for a Japanese person. He's outspoken, he's outrageous, he's a former punk rocker, he's an Anglophile, and he lives life on his own terms.
Hi, Chris!
Hello, Natsuki!
Good to see you!
Outspoken, rebellious, and often presumptuous. What little English he knew, he wasn't afraid to use. Natsuki and I quickly became close friends, meeting every week to eat, drink, and attempt to communicate.
He started his business mostly because he couldn't keep a job in the very regimented and structured way that Japanese society works. So Chris and Natsuki go on a bucket list tour because Natsuki needs a holiday. He's been working for years without a break, and his wife says he needs a holiday as well. So they take him to England and Paris. Now Natsuki is a force of nature. His English is rudimentary. He uses kind of phrase constructions that are really imaginative but off kilter, and he's photogenic as hell. So Chris and Natsuki go on this kind of quest to let Natsuki fulfill some of his dreams. And it's a kind of small scale film. It's shot quite beautifully because Chris is a very good videographer. And it's got a feel good comfort thing about it, which I really like. I mean, he does things like he wants to go and see Sid Vicious's grave, so he goes to London. And when he gets there, he finds out that Sid Vicious was actually buried in America. So there's lots of weird and wonderful things that go on. It's kind of low key, it's low risk. It's comfort viewing in a way, but it gives us a look at quite an individual and quite an eccentric individual who is a lot of fun to spend some time with. Now, I know that's not the usual thing I do with a movie, but Natsuki the Movie just got me. I mean, it sucked me in. It's a good, solid documentary, and it's a labour of love by Chris. Then we move on to some Russian Fantastica. I watched a movie which again runs about an hour called Luna from 1965, which has absolutely nothing to do with my cat Luna. It's a Russian Fantastica. The first half of it's very dry and scientific, and the second half is a kind of speculative fiction thing about Russia landing on the moon and starting a moon colony, which has some incredibly great visuals and special effects, and the imagination just takes off with it. Now the first stuff is very dry. It's a whole bunch of crusty Russian scientists, male and female, talking about what they know about the moon's surface, whether the moon surface is covered with sand where you will sink into it and never be seen again, whether it's like quicksand, whether it's crusty, what it is. And they go through the science of how they learned that even though the surface of the moon is quite friable and crunchy, people aren't going to sink into it. So they go into that in very dry detail. So the first half an hour of it is that. And then they talk about the speculation of traveling to the moon, colonizing the moon, and building a Soviet civilization on the moon. And it's beautifully eye-popping. It's very, very different from anything America was doing at the time. The only scientists who really saw in American documentaries in the 1960s were the Peenemünde boys, Willy Ley probably, and Werner von Braun, ex-Nazis who bombed London. But in Russia, these guys are the top scientists in their field. They know what they're talking about. They're very dry. I don't think they've had too much media training. But they go through the science before they get into the fiction. You can see Luna as well on YouTube, the same way you can see Chris Broad's documentary about Nutsky. And it's just wonderful. There's a reason why Roger Corman pinched all the special effects from Russian science fiction movies in the early 60s and pasted them together with third-rate American actors. It looks great, and it gives us a kind of alternate universe of the future in a really interesting way. And watching that was kind of fulfilling. There are a few other movies kind of like that. There's the movie that they pinched for Queen of Blood. Roger Corman's movie Queen of Blood pinched a lot of special effects from another Russian film, which I can't remember the name of, and I'll put it up here. But it really is one of those things where I'm finding for some reason right now a lot of Russian fantastica I didn't really know about. I've hit the books again, and I've looked through old science fiction reference books and found out about a few of these which are accessible in various ways to a modern audience. So Luna is a recommend from me. Again, you've got to get through that very dry scientific stuff at the start, but once you do, you'll get rewarded for it. The third one I've got for you is one of the Warner Brothers DC animation movies, which are doing, for me, much better than many of the Warner Brothers live action DCEU movies, with the possible exception of James Gunn's The Suicide Squad. This one's Batman The Long Halloween, which takes place over a year, where Batman has to deal with a new criminal called Holiday, who is killing off the Falcone crime family one at a time on different public holidays. Now, the Batman we get in this one, who's voiced by Jensen Ackles from Supernatural, is quite a nuanced Batman. He's a little more compassionate than the hardcore Batman you get in a lot of the movies, and he's still dealing with, why am I doing this? Am I getting revenge for my parents' death, or am I trying to repair their legacy? Because there are some dubious things about Thomas Wayne, Bruce Wayne's father, in this series. And Batman The Long Halloween deals with that. We also get a lot of backstory and an origin story for Harvey Dent, aka Two-Face, who's quite good in this one as well. Josh Duhamel does the voice for Harvey Dent in this. Carmine Falcone, the head of the Falcone crime family, which has very much been part of canon for Batman in the comics, is voiced by Titus Welliver, who people know from Bosch. And he does a really good job of it as well. There's a lot of complex characters in this. The two movies take their time to tell their story. We get Selena Kyle, aka Catwoman, in there, and she's got some links to things. Harvey Dent's wife, Gilda, gets a little bit of oxygen in this one as well. We get the Joker, we get Solomon Grundy, who's quite a nuanced character for someone who's kind of like a DC version of the Hulk. We get a number of other criminals as well. Who is there? Mad Hatter's in there as well. Scarecrow is in there. So you get a lot of the DC villains. The animation's got a bit of a retro look about it as well. Even though it's set in modern times, the cars are kind of old-fashioned 1940s cars, and everybody wears an overcoat and a hat. So it's got a combination of modern and kind of film noir retro look about it, which I think works really well. And the mystery of Holiday and who Holiday is and why Holiday is killing off the Falcone crime family It's a good mystery. It's based on a comic run from the 1990s that Jeff Loeb had something to do with. And if you're into the DC animation stuff, or if you want to kind of dip your toe in, Batman and the Long Halloween is a really good one. I think that over the last 10 years, the Warner Brothers DC animation movies have been constantly evolving and improving. And if you want to get some interesting stuff that looks like the comics but actually has complex characters and at times adult language, you could do a lot worse. They really are giving more than we expect from a mainstream animation kind of superhero franchise. In the middle of the 20th century, Robert A. Heinlein was the guy for science fiction. He was to science fiction in the middle part of the 20th century what Stan Lee was to superheroes in the second decade of the 21st. He was well regarded, he was doing things other people weren't doing. But from many, many people's viewpoints, he is a problematic author. And in 1957 he published a novel called The Door into Summer, which is about time travel. It's about chronic suspension. It sends a guy from 1975 to the year 2000. And there are speculations about what 1975 looked like from a 1950s point of view, and what the year 2000 would look like from the same kind of point of view. Now, there are some problems with the novel which are a little hard to surmount. For a start, the protagonist is a 30-year-old engineer who is kind of in a relationship with a 12-year-old precocious girl. Time travel takes care of that problem ultimately, but from a modern point of view, it's quite creepy. Now, there are a couple of things that have been inspired by this novel, and a lot of people who read it when they were a kid, before they really understood the nuance of how creepy some of the relationships in the book are. There have been a couple of things that were influenced by it, one of which is track 3, side 1 of this album from the 1960s. Pisces, Aquarius, Capricorn and Jones Limited, one of the Monkees albums. There's a song on the album called A Door into Summer, and it was inspired, Mike Nesmith said, by the Robert A. Heinlein novel. So there's that. I like the Monkees and Valet, Mike Nesmith. I mean, we've only got Mickey Dolenz left, which is sad for me because the Monkees were a big part of my TV viewing in my childhood. And the music still holds up now because they did get some very good songwriters and musicians on board. And one of the other things too is Jimi Hendrix was a support act for the Monkees when they toured in the 1960s, which is kind of wild. But I like this album, and I've got it on vinyl, which a lot of people may well be envious of, and rightly so. So there's those two things that were influenced by Heinlein. And there's also a 2021 Netflix movie, which is an adaptation of the original novel. And I like it. The movie was directed by Takahiro Miki, who's done a lot of this kind of genre stuff. And it's a kind of loose adaptation, which has all of the plot beats of the original novel. And for me, it's an incredibly satisfying one. And it's a Japanese adaptation, so it moves it from 20th century American culture to slightly futuristic alternate universe Japanese culture in a nice way. The protagonist is a guy called Soichiro, who is into robotics. Now, this is in an alternate 1995, where a few things are quite different. First off, there's been some experimentation in teleportation in Japan, which was kind of successful, but kind of went nowhere. And secondly, Soichiro invents an AI robot, which is about to be marketed, and the company, which is run by his guardian's brother. His guardian died recently and the brother got custody of the daughter of his guardian, a girl called Riko. And there's quite a close relationship between Soichiro and Riko, which parallels the one in the novel but isn't anywhere near as creepy. So Soichiro has a girlfriend who gets some of his shares because she's a gold digger and she works for the company. And there's a corporate takeover where he's kind of pushed out. So Soichiro gets depressed and starts self-medicating with alcohol. and decides that he is going to avail himself of an insurance service which is available in this 1995 alternate universe, which is he can have himself cryogenically frozen for 30 years. So he signs the paperwork and puts all of his assets into escrow and goes and decides he's going to go into this capsule and be frozen for 30 years. The people who run the place go, no, you can't do it. Your blood alcohol level is off the charts, and we've got a moral obligation not to let you do it. So he takes the paperwork home and he's got to sober up. Meanwhile, the evil girlfriend finds out about this paperwork. First off, she tries to kill him with an insulin injection, which is definitely a red flag in any relationship. And then she takes him to an alternative cryogenic place and freezes him for the 30 years so he is out of the way and they can do the corporate takeover and all that kind of business. He also has a cat called Pete, who is very, very photogenic and a lot of fun, and has been a companion to Soichiro for a number of years. And Pete keeps looking through the house to find the door into summer when it's winter time, because Pete hates the winter, and Pete is lovely. As a cat person, I'm on board with this. So Soichiro wakes up in 2025, and it's a beautifully futuristic 2025. This alternate universe goes ahead a lot faster than ours. One of the people who wakes him up is a humanoid android called Pete, who looks very much like a human, kind of acts more or less like a human. He's a full-on AI. And this Pete has got a little bit wrong with his programming because he's a little bit more self-determining than the other androids. So Soichiro has to learn a lot of things. He has to learn how to use a phone and an app to do anything. He's in the future and he's trying to find out what happened to Rico, and he goes on this journey through this beautifully textured futuristic 2025. He finds out what happened to the evil girlfriend. He finds out that Rico went missing the same night he went into cryonic suspension, and he's given a few clues by some corporate people for various companies that have formed since he went into cryonic stasis, which lead him to suspect there may be a way back to 1995. And the thing that really grabbed me with this movie is it's gentle and well-meaning. The people who are evil get dealt with by a combination of their own crimes and various other bits and pieces. So it's not a revenge thing at all. It's about a guy trying to find his way through life and to find his way back to his life and to rescue his cat. And to also make sure that everything's okay with young Rico, who's 17 at the time of 1995, and Soichiro himself is 27, so he treats her like a little sister. And yeah, I'm not going to go any further into it. You can probably guess the plot beats from there on. But it's beautifully done. It's gentle. It's quite emotional and touching at times. The robot Pete is fantastic. And he's played by an actor called Nahito Fujiki. And he's really good. I like what he does with kind of a almost, you know, Mr. Spock kind of character. And he really does give us an intelligence that's parallel to humans, but isn't human, in a really interesting way. It's on Netflix at the moment, The Door into Summer. I really recommend that you watch it because it's worthwhile. It's not high stakes stuff. It's not pew pew pow pow, end of life on Earth kind of stuff. But it's solid science fiction, and it's an honest adaptation of Heinlein's novel, showing respect to the original intellectual property, but still updating it and changing the things that absolutely needed to be changed to make it viable. I mean, the last one I've got for you is an Australian documentary from 2020 about a woman who lived in Sydney and King's Cross, which was the red light district of Sydney for many, many years, and is now a totally fucking boring touristy area. And it's called The Witch of King's Cross.
I darkened the room to clear my mind of all conscious thought. I had been constantly aware of a world of vast, mysterious powers. Now it had begun to emerge. Perhaps I'd better begin at the beginning.
For the first time in centuries, a witch has written a full confession, a revelation of her weird, inhuman power.
Rosalie Norton would probably be the most exciting artist from that period.
Trance magic.
The astral plane.
And the occult.
It's about a woman called Rosalie Norton who was an artist in 1940s, 1950s, 1960s Sydney, who was very, very controversial. There are a few reasons why she was controversial. First off, she was into witchcraft and occult magic in the same way Aleister Crowley and those guys were. And she was also a fantastic artist. She did lots of very transgressive paintings in the 50s with nudity and sexual situations and demons and nuns and all sorts of other things in it. Her art's very much in the same school as some of Norman Lindsay's art. And in 1950s Sydney, the churches were very strong, particularly the Catholic Church. There were a lot of Catholic coppers on the police force in Sydney. And she was arrested, and her partner was arrested. And two of her artworks were burned by the government, which is crazy to think. But she lived life on her own terms. She was bisexual. She wasn't unfamiliar with recreational pharmaceuticals. She lived a bohemian life in Sydney and kind of lived life on her own terms, which is really interesting. And her art, I like her art style. It's full of symbolism and magic. And she also got involved with the head of the Sydney Symphony Orchestra, a guy called Sir Eugene Goosens, who was brought out from England to the orchestra and who was kind of harassed by the police. Goosens went back to England for a while, came back to Australia, and the cops found in his luggage a movie, a reel of movie tape of a pornographic movie, some pornography, a couple of whips and chains and that kind of thing, and there was a big scandal about it, and he left Australia forever. He was in a relationship with Rosalie Norton, and she became known as the Witch of King's Cross. She played up to the media and confronted them with what they thought about her, and was one of the most scandalous and outrageous people in Sydney in the 50s and 60s, but was never recognised for the quality of her art until much, much later. She died in 1978 at the age of 62, and it's only since then that she's really been re-evaluated. The documentary by Sonia Bible does a little bit of reenactment of Rosalie Norton's life, along with using archival footage and archival imagery. It's a solid little documentary. Part of it was crowdfunded because this isn't a mainstream kind of movie. But it's a really fascinating look at an eccentric person who really, and particularly a woman, who in a very restrictive and tight-ass time lived life on her own terms. Now, the documentary is on Amazon Prime if you're interested. And if you want to see something just a little bit different, and something that shows us that eccentricity and people living life on their own terms is not something that started in the 1960s. There were outliers way before that. And sometimes they paid the price for being forerunners of a change in society which many, many people in power resisted. That one's a recommend for me as well. So anyway, that's it for this time around. I hope you enjoyed me covering those movies, the documentaries in particular. I really want to watch more documentaries in 2022. I think that there are a few out there I haven't seen, and there are a few upcoming ones I want to see. And I want to see more science fiction as well. I've got some science fiction for the rest of the month, movies I haven't seen, which is kind of hard to find in the science fiction realm, believe me. So I've got some science fiction movies for the rest of the month. I've also got some classic films that I haven't seen, but I've had copies of for years. And I'm going to hit those ones as well. I've got about 4 or 5 videos before the end of the month. And I'm going to be covering all of those before I can have a break and just watch whatever the hell I want to. So the challenge is there. The struggle is real, but I'm enjoying it at the same time. So anyway, thank you very much for watching. As always, please consider liking, subscribing, leaving a comment. You can also support the channel at patreon.com/paleocinema. So things here are still getting very wobbly as far as the big C is concerned. Not cancer, the other one. We're doing what we can to protect ourselves. And you do that too, please. Look after yourself, wear a mask, get the jabs, get the boosters, do whatever you need to do to stay safe and well. Watch some good movies you haven't seen before. Watch some bad movies you haven't seen before. Look after yourself, and I'll catch you next time.